I don't like hospitals, not because of the sickness or the smell, but because of what I saw one night when I visited my grandmother. She was in a private room on the first floor of a big city hospital. She'd been there for a few days after a mild stroke. Nothing life-threatening, but the doctors wanted to keep an eye on her. I arrived late in the evening, just after visiting hours officially ended. The nurse at the desk saw me and nodded, but told me to be quick. My grandma was dozing, in bed when I got there. The room was cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones even with the heater running. The walls were pale blue, with those generic hospital pictures of flowers hanging on them. There was a chair near the window, and I sat there quietly, holding her hand. About an hour later, I noticed the lights in the hallway outside flicker. The dull fluorescent hum suddenly dropped, then came back on with a buzz. The door to the room creaked open. A nurse stepped in. She looked different from the nurses I'd seen before. Her uniform was old-fashioned, like something from decades ago. The dress was long, with a white apron and a starched collar. Her hair was pinned up tightly, and her face was pale but expressionless. I blinked, thinking maybe it was some kind of hospital tradition I didn't know about. "Are you okay, ma'am?" she said in a soft, almost whispery voice. I nodded, but something felt off. She moved slowly toward my grandmother's bedside, adjusting the blankets. I asked, "Is everything all right? Does she need anything?" The nurse didn't answer, just looked at me with blank eyes. I felt a chill. Suddenly, the room grew colder. My grandma stirred and opened her eyes briefly. The nurse leaned over and whispered something I couldn't hear. Then, she turned and walked toward the door. I asked, "Wait, who are you? I don't remember seeing you before." She paused in the doorway, her head tilted like a curious bird. "I'm the night nurse," she said softly, her voice barely above a breath, and then she was gone. I sat there, my heart racing. Something about her didn't feel right. I looked at my grandma. She was awake now, staring at the door. Her eyes were wide and glassy. I asked, "Grandma, what did she say to you?" She shook her head slowly. She said, "To be careful." I laughed nervously. "Be careful? Of what?" Grandma didn't answer. That night I stayed by her side, but every time I dozed off, I felt like someone was watching. I'd wake to see the door slightly open and the hallway dark and empty. At one point, I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, outside the door. I opened my eyes. No one there. But the door creaked again, as if pushed by a breeze. The next morning, I told the day nurse about the night nurse I saw. She frowned. "There hasn't been a night nurse on this floor for years. We usually have aides overnight, but no nurses. Maybe you were just tired." I didn't believe her. Later that day, I asked the hospital receptionist if there had ever been a nurse dressed like the one I saw. She looked uncomfortable. Then she said quietly, "Years ago, a nurse died on this floor during her shift. She was found in a patient's room, alone. Some say she still watches over patients at night." I swallowed hard. I didn't want to believe it, but the feeling that night was real. And even now, when I think about it, I get chills. Because I don't know if she was watching my grandma or me. I never believed in scary hospital stories until the night I had to visit my uncle. He'd been admitted after a sudden heart attack. The doctor said he was stable but needed constant monitoring. It was late autumn, and the hospital was nearly empty when I arrived. The place smelled of disinfectant mixed with something faintly sour, like old cloth left damp for too long. I was told to find room 205 on the second floor. When I got there, the hallway was unusually quiet. No TV sounds, no distant voices, just the low hum of the ventilation system. I pushed open the door to room C-205. It was darker than I expected. The lights inside were off, but the window blinds were half closed, letting in thin stripes of cold moonlight. My uncle was lying on the bed, awake but silent. His face looked pale and drawn, eyes fixed on the ceiling. I sat down beside him and tried to start a conversation, but he barely responded. After a few minutes, I noticed something odd. There was a chair pushed against the far wall, but something was wrong about it. The chair was turned to face the wall, not the bed. I frowned. Usually, chairs in patient rooms face the bed or window. I asked my uncle, "Who usually sits there?" He didn't answer. I thought maybe he was tired. After a while, I got up to grab a glass of water from the sink. When I looked back, the chair had moved. It was now facing the bed. I blinked. Maybe I'd imagined it. I told myself I was just tired, sat back down. Then I heard it, a soft creaking sound, like the chair scraping lightly against the floor. I looked toward it again. The chair was now rocking slightly, back and forth, slow and quiet. I stood up, heart racing. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" No reply. The door was closed and the hallway was empty. I felt a cold draft brush past me. Goosebumps prickled my arms. I reached for the light switch. The lights flickered on. The chair was still rocking. I stepped closer, heart pounding. Suddenly the chair stopped. I touched it. It was cold. Colder than the rest of the room. I backed away slowly. My uncle whispered, "They watch." "Who?" I asked, confused. He looked at me, eyes wide, the quiet ones. Before I could ask more, the nurse came in to check his vitals. I left the room for a moment to call my mom. When I returned, the chair was back against the wall, facing it again. I asked my uncle if he moved it. He shook his head. The rest of the night was restless. I kept hearing soft creaks, like footsteps on the floor outside the room. At one point, I swear I heard whispering. But when I looked, no one was there. When morning came, I was relieved. My uncle looked better, but his eyes held a distant sadness. As I left, I glanced back at the chair. It was turned to face the bed, and I could swear I saw a shadow sitting in it. I'll never forget the night I went to visit my friend Mark in the hospital. Mark had been in a car accident and was in stable condition, but with a broken arm and some bruises. His family was out of town, so I was the only visitor allowed. The hospital was old, the kind with creaky floors and faded paint on the walls. It had that cold hospital smell, like antiseptic mixed with something musty and old. When I got there, it was late evening. The lobby was almost empty except for a tired-looking receptionist and a janitor pushing a cart down the hallway. I asked for Mark's room, and the nurse gave me directions to the third floor, room 312. She warned me visiting hours were almost over, but said I could stay a little while if I wanted. I took the elevator up and walked down the long hallway. The hallway was dim, the lights flickering faintly. The smell was stronger here, like wet concrete and bleach. I found room 312. The door was cracked open a little. I knocked softly and pushed the door wider. The room was empty. I blinked. The bed was made, the sheets neat and untouched. No personal belongings. Nothing. I called out, "Mark?" No answer. I stepped inside. The window was closed, but the faint street noise came through. The bedside monitor was unplugged, and the TV on the wall was off. It didn't make sense. I checked my phone for the room number again. It was right. 312. I walked back out to the hallway. Just then, I heard a door close behind me. I turned quickly. The door to room 312 was now closed tight. I went back and knocked. No answer. I pressed the handle. It was locked. I looked around the hallway. No one. My heart started pounding. I ran to the nurse's station at the end of the hall, but it was empty. The lights were off, and the chair was pushed under the desk like no one had been there for hours. I called Mark's phone. It went straight to voicemail. I tried the number again. Still no answer. I walked down the hall to the elevator. The doors opened, and the elevator was empty. I pressed the lobby button, and it started to move. When I reached the first floor, the doors opened to the lobby, but it was completely deserted. No receptionist, no patients, no staff, just silence. I felt a cold sweat. I walked toward the front doors. They were locked. I tried pushing and pulling. Nothing. I could hear my own breathing, fast and shallow. The overhead lights flickered. Then the sound came. A faint tapping. Like someone was tapping their fingernails on a wall. It came from the stairwell. I didn't want to go near it, but I had no choice. I walked slowly toward the stairwell door. The tapping grew louder. I pushed the door open. The stairwell was empty, but the tapping continued. I climbed the stairs. At the top, the tapping stopped. The hallway was dark, cold. I felt a presence. I turned and saw the silhouette of a man standing at the end of the hall. He was motionless, facing the wall. The only light came from the emergency exit sign flickering above his head. I called out, "Hey, are you okay?" No response. I took a step closer. He didn't move. I reached out to touch his shoulder. My hand passed right through him, like he was a shadow. I stumbled back, heart pounding. Then he turned, slowly. His face was pale and blank, eyes wide and staring, his mouth opened but no sound came out. I backed away, shaking. Suddenly, the lights went out. Pitch black. I heard the tapping again, all around me, closer. Then a cold hand brushed my arm. I screamed and ran down the stairs, bursting through the locked lobby doors. I finally felt air on my face. I got in my car and drove home without looking back. I tried calling the hospital the next day. They told me Mark was discharged the day before. I asked about room 312. They said it was empty and locked for cleaning. No, one was admitted there for weeks. I never heard from Mark again, and I still get that tapping sometimes, right outside my window. A few years ago, I had to visit my uncle in the hospital. He had suffered a mild heart attack, and they kept him overnight for observation. It wasn't anything too serious, and I offered to bring him some clothes and magazines to help him pass the time. The hospital was about a 30-minute drive from my place. I got there around 8 p.m. It was one of those older hospitals, with yellowish lighting and narrow halls that always felt too quiet. The kind of place that already makes your skin crawl, even when nothing's happening. The nurse at the front desk told me my uncle had been moved to room 319 in the East Wing. She gave me directions and smiled politely, but her eyes looked tired. The hospital didn't seem very busy. I didn't see any doctors or patients walking around. Just the sound of distant machines and the low hum of fluorescent lights. I took the elevator up to the 3rd floor, and that's when I started to notice how empty everything was. I stepped out into a hallway that smelled like rubbing alcohol and old plastic. The floor tiles were dull and had scuff marks, and the lights overhead flickered faintly every now and then. I walked past room after room. Most of the doors were closed, but a few were cracked open. I peeked into one and saw a dark, empty bed, with the sheets all tucked in like no one had ever used them. There were no nurses around, no visitors, not even a patient in a wheelchair. When I got to room 319, I knocked lightly and pushed the door open. The room was completely empty. No bed, no furniture, just bare floors and an unplugged monitor hanging from the wall. I stood there, confused. I checked the number again, 319. I even pulled out my phone to check the text from the nurse downstairs. It said, Room 319, East Wing. I backed out of the room and walked around to see if I had missed something. Maybe I'd taken a wrong turn. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Behind me, slow, heavy, steady, just a few paces behind. I turned around, expecting to see a nurse or maybe security, but the hallway was still empty. I stood there, completely still, and listened. Nothing. I called out, "Hello?" My voice echoed faintly down the hall, but there was no response. I started walking back toward the elevator, a little faster this time. That's when I passed by room 315 and noticed something strange. The door was open, but inside, it was pitch black. Every other room I'd passed had some light spilling in from the hallway, but this one felt like a hole in the wall. I took a step closer. From inside, I swear I heard someone whisper my name, not loud, almost like someone saying it while breathing out. Chris. I froze. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I stepped back and rushed toward the elevator. When I hit the button, it didn't light up. I kept pressing it, but nothing happened. The doors stayed shut. Then I heard the footsteps again. Closer now. I spun around, and this time, I saw someone at the end of the hallway. At first, I was relieved. Maybe it was a nurse. But the longer I looked, the more that relief turned to dread. The person was just standing there facing the wall, not moving. Their gown looked like a patient's, but the way they were standing, stiff, arms flat against their sides. Not right. "Hey," I said, trying to sound confident. "Do you work here?" No answer. No movement. Then the lights flickered again, and for a split second, I thought I saw their head twitch, like it jerked slightly toward me but then snapped back. I backed away slowly, still facing them. I turned and walked fast, trying to find the stairs. I found a red exit sign at the end of the hallway and pushed the door open. The stairwell was cold, colder than it should have been. The air smelled musty, like mold and wet cement. I ran down the stairs all the way to the ground floor. When I burst out into the lobby, there was no one at the front desk, but the lights were on. The air felt normal again. I walked to the front entrance and stepped outside. The moment I crossed that threshold, it was like something had let go of my chest. I could breathe again. I walked straight to my car and called the hospital from the parking lot. A different nurse answered this time. I asked about my uncle, and she told me he had been discharged 2 hours ago. He was already home. Confused and still shaken, I asked about the East Wing. She went quiet for a second. Then she said, "Sir, the East Wing on the 3rd floor has been shut down for renovations since last year. No patients are allowed up there." I didn't say anything. I just hung up. I sat in my car for a long time, trying to make sense of what I had just experienced. Still don't know who or what I saw up there. And the worst part is, sometimes when I'm lying in bed, I think I hear that same whisper. Faint, breathing my name from the darkest corners of the room. Chris. This happened when I was 19. My dad had just gone through surgery for a broken leg. It wasn't life-threatening, but they had to keep him overnight for observation. My mom had to take care of my younger siblings, so I volunteered to stay with Mom and him in the hospital. The hospital room was on the 2nd floor, in an older building that hadn't been renovated in a long time. It had faded green walls, a small window facing the parking lot, and a recliner for visitors. At first, it felt fine. Boring, but fine. My dad was still groggy from the anesthesia, drifting in and out of sleep. I sat in the recliner next to him, scrolling on my phone, occasionally getting up to adjust his blanket or hand him water. Around midnight, the halls grew quieter. The lights outside the room dimmed. Nurses checked in once or twice and then left us alone. My dad fell into a deep sleep, and I leaned back in the recliner to rest my eyes. I must have dozed off. When I woke up, it was because I felt like someone was watching me. Not the normal kind of feeling when someone stares for a second. This felt heavy, like a pressure on my chest. Like whatever was watching me didn't blink. I opened my eyes and looked toward the hospital bed. My dad was still asleep, breathing steadily. But I wasn't alone. Someone was standing in the doorway. It was a tall figure. I couldn't see their face, just a silhouette in the dim light from the hallway. They weren't moving, just standing there perfectly still, half inside the room. At first I thought it was a nurse. Maybe they were checking on my dad. "Hello?" I said, rubbing my eyes. No answer, no movement. I sat up fully now, more alert. "Can I help you?" Nothing. I stood up and took a step forward. The moment I did, the figure stepped back out into the hallway, vanishing from my view. I rushed to the doorway and looked both ways down the hall. It was empty. I walked out into the hallway and stood there, trying to see where the person had gone. The lights were dimmed, but I could still see clearly enough. There was no one. I even checked the nurse's station at the end of the hall. It was empty. I went back to the room, a little unnerved but trying to shake it off. Maybe it was a nurse who didn't want to disturb me. I tried to sleep again. About an hour later, I woke up to a noise. It was soft, like a dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. I opened my eyes and sat up. This time, the figure was inside the room. It was standing in the corner near the cabinet, half hidden in shadow. I could barely make it out, but it was there. Still. Watching. It was too dark to see a face, but I could see the outline of the head. Shoulders. Long arms hanging at its sides. I couldn't move. I wanted to speak, to ask who it was, but the words caught in my throat. I just sat there, frozen in place, staring. Then slowly, the figure turned. Not with its feet. Its whole body rotated like it was on a swivel. It turned to face the wall and then vanished. Not walked out, just gone. I leapt out of the chair and turned on every light in the room. My dad woke up startled, asking what was wrong. I told him I thought I saw someone, maybe even sleep paralysis, I didn't know. He looked confused but said he hadn't heard anything. I stayed awake the rest of the night. At 6 a.m., a nurse came in to check my dad's vitals. I asked her if someone had come into our room during the night. She looked puzzled and said no. We've been short-staffed overnight. Only one of us was making rounds. And I know I didn't come in here. I described the figure, tall, unmoving, watching. She paused, then gave me a weird look. Then she said quietly, "A man passed away in this room last week. It was unexpected. He was alone when it happened. The night nurse said she found him standing in that same corner, just staring at the wall." He collapsed a few minutes later. I felt a chill crawl up my back. She probably shouldn't have told me that, but maybe she saw how shaken I looked. My dad was discharged that afternoon and we left without saying much. But here's the part that still bothers me. A few days later, my dad called me in the middle of the night. He sounded groggy, like he had just woken up. He said, "There was someone in my room last night." I asked what he meant. He said he woke up and saw a man standing in the corner, not moving, just watching him. He thought it was a dream, but when he sat up, the man turned and vanished, just like I had described. I never told him what I saw that night in the hospital, and I never will. But I think something followed him home.